stage tonight. Please join me in welcoming Erica. She is reading Cardamom Bread. For much of the past year, I have not been interested in listening to much of what my mother had to say. Surface conversations were fine, but I was increasingly uninterested in talking about the world and our experience in it. Over the past 3 to 5 years, we have significantly diverged in matters of politics, social issues, and religion. Like many families around the country, this past election year was especially fraught with conflict. You might recognize this conversation. How can you possibly think we can absorb every single person that wants to come here? How can you possibly think a giant wall is good for the soul of America? Or this one. Don't you see that new economic policy will bring the most jobs? Don't you see that part of the government's job is to care for the most vulnerable? The second voice is mine, but both are caricatures. Our dialogue would go nowhere, and that's when we were actually talking to each other. Mostly, we stuck to ourselves, quietly brooding in our confusion. Confusion often gave way to alienation. Sometimes my mom seemed almost unrecognizable to me, and I to her. Recently, I was walking down the street when I was suddenly transported to my grandmother's kitchen by the smell of cardamom bread. It's amazing how aromas can do that. In that moment, I was a 7-year-old girl, surrounded by loved ones, eating warm bread, and feeling so much at home. The memory came and went quickly, but it resonated with something beautiful that had been buried by time and neglect. This is sort of like what I experienced with my mom last December. Something happened with us that triggered a deep, resonant memory of a more authentic relationship. Recently retired, yet still healthy, my parents spend a lot of time volunteering. One of their outlets is assisting Bhutanese refugees arriving to Minneapolis after years in a Nepali camp. Since they got involved several years ago, they have spent anywhere from 5 to 25 hours per week helping with homework, medical appointments, appliance repair, and introducing them to Minnesota recreation. My dad's stories of teaching the boys to fish are equally harrowing and hilarious. The past year or so has been especially focused on Saraswati, a family matriarch with cancer. Although they shared very little on the surface, my mom and Saraswati developed a deep friendship. They bonded while in hospital waiting rooms and car rides. My mom knew Saraswati's family and was gradually learning more about her life during and before she became a refugee. Shortly before Christmas, my mom and I were talking on the phone while I drove to work. I asked about her unusually fatigued voice and if she would have a chance to rest that day. She answered by telling me of the 1 a.m. call from Saraswati's daughter the night before, asking for my mom to come. Saraswati's treatments had stopped working and she was overwhelmed with pain. Her body gave every sign that the end was near. As soon as she received the phone call, my mom and dad hurried to dress and drove immediately to Saraswati's home to sit with her for what became several hours. When Saraswati saw my mom arrive in the middle of the night, she smiled and said, "My best friend is here." She died later that week. In the days that followed, my conversations with my mom were full of tears. Hers were from losing a dear friend. Mine were from the sadness of a difficult death, but also because of the generous actions of my mom. I cried tears of gladness to have witnessed such beauty in humanity. I realized, and told her later, that I had never been so proud to be her daughter. The truth is that these acts of kindness were in Mom all along, all the way through the election season and long before, when we were growing apart because we forgot how to talk to each other, or just didn't want to. Through the thickening fog of each of us trying to have the right ideas about God, politics, and the world, I lost sight of her as a whole person. In many ways, I had reduced her to a collection of sound bites that offended or irritated me. Witnessing her friendship with Saraswati was like catching the scent of a familiar, comforting aroma. I recognized this person. I experienced something familiar and deep, something way beyond sound bites and caricatures. Human behavior is never easy to understand, and we all live with paradox and complexity. Although my mom and I will probably never agree on some things, or many things, I hope I have learned a lesson in humility and generosity. I also hope to someday make my own daughters proud, but that might have to wait until after adolescence.